they must not have been paying very close attention over at whoever owns, I don't even know who owns Miller Lite. As you all know, I don't really know much about beer at all. Beer, I guess, and professional sports teams these days. I have celiac disease, so I cannot drink. Drinking beer for me is like drinking poison. I can't drink beer. Normal beer. I know everyone's going to say, what about sorghum ale? I always want to say to people, Clay, does that sound awesome to you? Sorghum ale?
I just want to say that might have been the most Brian Stelter-like audio drop of your career. I don't really drink beer, and I don't know anything about sports. And then everybody out there is like, Stelter's
right,
like, I knew. Stelter pumped his fist, and he was like, I knew Buck was my guy.
Sexton is on the team. He is right there with me.
Soon, you and Stelter are going to be having like a meeting where you just hug and cry. You know, just cry one out. You put your head on his shoulder.
We're going to be wearing some CNN onesies. It's going to be great, you know, with the little feet built into the PJs.
Yeah, the walking around with vagina hats before all is said and done here pretty soon in the Women's March.
All right, let's get back to making fun of Coors Light or Miller Lite or whoever, sir. Excuse me. So here we had Miller Lite watching what had happened to Bud Light and deciding, you know what, it's a good time for us to release an ad where we also try to move the feminist conversation about beer making forward. Play some of this audio, guys.
Here's a little known fact. Women were among the very first to brew beer ever. From Mesopotamia to the Middle Ages to colonial America, it's time beer made it up to women. So today, Miller Lite is on a mission to clean up not just their shit, but the whole beer industry's shit. Miller Lite has been scouring the internet for all this shit and buying it back so that they can turn it into good shit for women brewers. But there's definitely more shit out there. In your attic, in the garage, in your parents' basement. Send any shit you got into Miller Lite and they'll turn that into good shit too. So here's to women, because without us, there would be no beer.
Yeah, there also would be no humanity or existence. We all get that. We're all very pro-women here. This is utterly bizarre. And also this game that we're all going to play now. Do you know what the most consistent privilege across all cultures, across all societies, all races, all religions, all periods in history? You know what the real privilege is, Clay? Good-looking people. Now, Clay is shaking his head. He's like, yeah, I know. It's a big challenge for the very good-looking folks. But I'm just telling you, pretty people privilege, as it is known, that is real. And, you know, it's just the way that it is. And this notion that, you know, we're not using bikinis to sell beer anymore. It's like, what are you using to sell beer these days? Because the whole guy dressed as a girl thing didn't work out very well.
So for people out there who haven't seen this video, this is a woman walking through a factory floor, like a beer universe, I don't know, brewery. I'm not sure exactly what it's supposed to be. And behind her, there's all these photos of old Miller Lite ads with girls in bikinis. So first of all, if you want to talk, everybody wants to talk about privilege these days. The apex of privilege is hot girl privilege. If you are an incredibly good-looking woman, you get more privilege than anyone who has ever existed in the history of mankind. And everybody out there listening knows that this goes on all the time. Remember back in the day, there used to be Seinfeld's a great show, right? Seinfeld was dating a really good-looking woman, and he basically made this argument. She could do anything that she wanted. Really good-looking women can get away with anything. So if you really wanted to go and address the privilege hierarchy, this is the apex, okay? I also don't understand. If you are Miller Lite, and you are looking around at everything that's going on with Bud Light, and you have legitimately, Buck, seen your overall brand sales, this was in the Wall Street Journal, skyrocket by 20%. Why in the world would you decide that you were going to do anything to help light yourself on fire in the same method, magnitude, or process by which Bud Light has done this? And I think the only answer is because this is also funny. This would be a funnier ad than this ridiculous Miller Lite ad. Would be the guy who was sitting in the marketing room when they played this ad, who 100% knew that this ad was a disaster, but was afraid he'd be called a misogynist if he said, hey, I don't think we should repudiate our ads featuring women in bikinis. And this also ties in. Can we pull back up the Tudor Dixon clip that we played on Thursday? I own a beer, Gratis Beer, located in Tennessee. We got a beer company. We're having fun with it. It's just in Tennessee. I'd encourage you to drink it. If I owned a big national beer company right now, I would go so aggressively into girls in bikinis, parties, football, having an amazing time, which was the number one way we sold beer up until like 7 years ago. And my beer sales would skyrocket because the overwhelming majority of my beer drinkers like pretty girls, football, and having a good time. This is not rocket science, okay? The number of women out there who are offended because girls in bikinis help to sell beer is virtually zero. There's people who claim that they're offended, but the actual number of people who are offended by this is zero.
I mean, look at, we're in the news business, right? Basically. And you look on TV. Now, yes, it's not a modeling competition, but it's obviously an advantage for men and for women. I mean, you'll notice, like, even the male anchors are, they tend to choose for handsomeness at some level. This is just a basic reality of marketing that we're all aware of. Now, there can be things can go too far. There can be things in bad taste. But what's really interesting is that they've clearly decided that the beer industry as partying, football, and babes is something that they're ashamed of. And I mean the people who work in marketing in the beer industry, right? That's what this ad is really all about. It's like, I can't believe this is how we used to sell stuff. It's like, well, ultimately, you're talking about beer. I mean, I know people in this, we got all the emails that you could tell the difference between, Molson and Coors and Miller and Sam Adams. I mean, I have no idea.
Okay. Well, I will say, like, higher end beer. Like, okay, there's a difference between Guinness and Bud Light, right? I could tell the difference between those every day. There's not much difference between, I'm going to go to the war on this, Buck. Everybody out there being like, you give me a blind taste test and I can tell you what a Miller Lite is versus a Coors Light versus a Bud Light. I give you nachos and a hot dog and you eat those first and then you start to take a sip of beer. You can't tell the difference.
My point here just being that it is obviously a big part of it is marketing, right? It's the perception of the brand. What does this brand represent for you? What does this brand represent overall? That's true in beer. It's true in, chocolate bars and cars and you name it, right? We all know this stuff. Marketing 101. Tudor Dixon, you mentioned her. We have it now. Here she is. She ran for governor. Now she's on the Clay and Buck podcast, which is a phenomenal podcast stream you should all subscribe to on the iHeart app. But anyway, here she is saying, beer and bikini's not a bad combo.
From a marketing perspective, I think it's very clear that those were not their buyers. So now they know that the trans community was not their main source of revenue. You have got to look at that. I'm telling you, my marketing strategy for them will work. Go back to chicks in bikinis with a car wash, drinking Bud Light. You're going to sell a lot.
It's true. I mean, the association also, this is true for wine drinkers. And now I'm starting to sound like I sit around with a top hat and a monocle. I don't drink beer, but I drink a little bit of wine. But I'm dressed like Mr. Peanut when I drink my wine, apparently. I've got like a little cane, little top hat. But, they've done studies to show, this is sounding really nerdy, we're talking about alcohol, but that people's belief that what they're drinking is really good, meaning really, really excellent vintage, does enhance the pleasure they get from drinking it. So the perception can drive some of the pleasurable brain signal reality of it. And so the whole point here for Miller and Bud and everything is someone, they crack it open, relaxing, partying. I mean, this is just in all the marketing. And if the association is beautiful women, partying, sunny place, good day, that can affect the way the beer actually tastes to the person, as crazy to some as that may sound.
Most of life is aspirational. And most of marketing is making people aspire to be in better places than they are right now. Most beer drinking, let's be honest, is by men, by themselves, in their house. Right? I think that's the number one way I would imagine that beer is consumed on average in America is a guy who's 50 years old drinks a beer by himself in his house. The way they sell beer is, oh, you're going to be at the Super Bowl and you're going to be hanging out with a Victoria's Secret supermodel back when the Victoria's Secret supermodels actually were good looking and not just fat chicks. And you're going to be hanging out with all your best buddies, high-fiving, your team's going to win. And the reality is you're probably watching your team lose from your house by yourself. And that's the reality. But the aspirational aspects of it are good. And here's the challenge. And I think about this a lot because I could see this tying in with why Vice has gone bankrupt and why BuzzFeed has collapsed. Buck, these marketing people that all these big brands hire, they live in New York and L.A., they never drink beer. They certainly never drink light beer. And they go out and they talk to their friends, and it's some, Harvard MBA who's 37 years old, a woman, and she's like, hey, what would make you drink Miller Lite or Bud Light, even though her friends never drink it now? And they sit around and they're drinking wine, and they say, well, if they were just less misogynistic, maybe. And the answer is no, you're never going to walk up to a bar if you are a 37-year-old graduate degree woman, by and large, and be like, hey, I'll have a Miller Lite. You just aren't going to do that. You're not going to order a Bud Light. But they convince themselves that if they run a marketing campaign to